Good morning, Life Spring. It's great to be with you today. Appreciate you being here, whether you're here live or online. We got to talk about storms today. Now, if you know anything about storms, you've been in storms. Anybody ever live on the coast? I'm just curious where the storms, the worst. I know we had Fran years ago where we lost power for a while. But have you ever been in Pensacola or on the Gulf Coast or where the storms really hit? I mean, massively hit. Those guys really prepare for storms. I mean, they have to. They absolutely have to. When we moved down to Beaufort, South Carolina, that's down near Hilton Head, Charleston, that area, I was amazed by the change of how people prepared for storms. So we went there to plant a church. We were just getting to know the community, so we tried to get involved and build relationships and make a difference. And so one of the things we did is we started volunteering for Habitat for Humanity. And they were building houses strange. I mean, I thought I knew something about construction, but down there they were doing it completely different. And why? Because of hurricanes. And so my first job, I get there, first time, they gave me these serious metal straps that I had to pound on every set of studs. They had to go across the studs, and I had to pound them and connect them. And I'm like, I've never seen anything like that. And I asked, and they said, oh, those are hurricane straps. Those are nobody will ever see them, right? They're on the inside, underneath plastic, under the siding. You have no idea they're there, but they make all the difference in the world. Maybe you saw this picture back when Dorian hit Mexico. You remember that hurricane? And you see the big difference in the houses here. Let me get the right color here. So you see this house here, right? Everybody see that house? That had hurricane straps, right? That was the one. Notice this house here. You can see the yellow tile floor and the pink tile floor there. Everybody see that? I mean, the houses around this house are just totally demolished, totally right down to the tile floors. I mean, there was a great crash. But houses that are built differently now with the technology we know, now in Beaufort, it was zoned. You had to, by code. I mean, you had to use hurricane straps. In fact, we have shutters here. You know those decorative things you put next to your windows? They look like the old-fashioned wood shutters people have. Well, down in Beaufort, a lot of the houses had real shutters. I mean, they unhinged, they unhooked, and they closed off your windows for a storm because they were ready for storms. Now, we do the same thing here. We're ready for storms. We just don't worry about hurricanes like they do down there. Like when the weatherman tells you it's going to snow, what do? You run to the grocery store, right? You buy your milk, you buy your bread. What's that? Because you're getting ready for a storm, right? It's probably really not going to happen, but you're ready just in case, right? Because you're getting ready for a storm. You're doing the same thing. You're trying to be wise and you're trying to be prepared, right? Do right by your family. That's why we have insurance. Things like medical insurance, right? We hope we never use it, but we got it. We got it when Johnny breaks his leg, we can rush him to the emergency room. Everything's covered. Everything's good. We have auto insurance for that reason. We hope we never get in an accident, but we got it when we do, right? We have things called life insurance. We hope we never, ever need it. Well, we know life is limited, but still, we hope we never need our life insurance policy, but you got it. Just in case. We're trying to be wise, we're trying to prepare, we're trying to be set for our family. Well, Jesus is finishing the Sermon on the Mount. In fact, we close out the Sermon on the Mount today, and he finishes by talking about storms, and he finishes by telling us, hey, we need to be ready. We need, in a sense, spiritually to go to the grocery store, get our milk and bread, or make sure we have our medical insurance or our car insurance or whatever it might be. He's saying we need to spiritually be prepared. So if you have your Bibles, we're gonna go to Matthew chapter 7, and I'm going to pick it up in 24, verse 24, and we're actually going to finish out the Sermon on the Mount today. So Matthew chapter 7, verse 24, and we're going to talk about storms. We're going to talk about these real big storms of life. He says this. He says, therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine. Now let's stop right there and talk about the therefore. This has been a big sermon. We've been talking about it for a few weeks now, have we not? It's been a big sermon, and Jesus has talked about a lot. And this, therefore, is about everything that went before, everything he's talked about. And basically, the Sermon on the Mount is the Christian manifesto. It is how do I do this new thing called Christianity? How do I walk in its ways and live in its ways? How do I follow Jesus? How do I do this thing called Christianity? And so Jesus has covered a lot of ground, right? He started with the Beatitudes, where he taught us what real Christianity looks like, that it always starts with being poor in spirit and then mourning over our sins, and we receive Christ, and then it becomes, hey, about meekness and surrender to God, and then hungering and thirsting for righteousness, and then mercy, right? He just walks right through these things, Beatitudes, describing what Christianity looks like, because he wants to make sure everybody understands the real deal, to make sure we really have it. And then he does something different. He goes and he describes, hey, I want you to make a difference. And so let me tell you how you can go be a world changer. And he talks about us being salt and us being light, right? That's what he talks about next. And after that, he talks about the Word of God. He talks about how you can trust it right down to the very words chosen. And then he talks about morality, what real morality looks like. Not what the world tells you, the Bible says, but what Jesus tells us. He goes, hey, you have heard it said, but I tell you. And he goes through morality. And then what does he do? Then he goes through spiritual disciplines. He talks about giving. He talks about prayer. He talks about all of this stuff that we're supposed to do. He tells us how we're supposed to do it. So you see how Jesus has walked through a lot of material? And the most recent stuff, therefore, right? The most recent stuff has been some hard stuff. Some heavy stuff. 3 huge truths that are just mind-boggling truths. The first one is that there's really only 2 paths in life. There's only really 2 paths you can take in life. There's this wide, spacious, popular road that most take, that many are on, but he says it leads to destruction. And then he says, but there's this narrow gate and this narrow road, and few find it. But that's the one that leads to life. Now, that's just earth-shattering for us. I mean, it takes a while to absorb that and really internalize that and live by it, change our lives by it. But then he shared another truth that was just powerful. He said, you got to understand something. There's this massive conspiracy, in a sense, this PR campaign. There's all these false teachers out there, and what they're trying to do is get everybody to take that wide road that's so bad. And then the last one he told us was last week, which was, hey, even though you think you're fine with God, you may not be, right? He says, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter into the kingdom of heaven. And he said, on that day, many will come to me and say, Lord, Lord. And he's going to say, hey, I never knew you. Those are hard things. Those were hard things to hear. They were hard things to preach. And so Jesus now gets to the end. He says, therefore. You've heard the whole sermon in a sense. So he's about ready to close. He's about ready to give the invitation. And he's basically pushing for a decision. And he says this. So therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine, everything that I've said here today, all 3 chapters, chapter 5, chapter 6, chapter 7 for us. He says, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice. So actually changes your life, lives by these things that I've told you today. Whoever does that, puts them into practice, is like a wise man. And that's the word I want you to see, wise man. So if you really want to be wise, if you want to be a wise person, a wise woman, you want to live like God wants you to, he says, basically you have to take what I've given you today, this whole sermon, and basically all the words of Jesus, and you actually got to live by them. You got to put them into practice. And when you do, you're like a wise man who built his house on the rock. That means you took the extra effort to dig down and lay a foundation. Rock. Verse 25. This is what happens because you have a good foundation. Because you're living your life based on Jesus' words. He says, the rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against the house. Now notice it's an all-out storm here. This is hurricane, right? It's coming from above. The rains are coming down. The streams are rising, so the water's from below, right? The flood is coming in, the streams rising, and then from the side, the winds are blowing. So, right? From above, from below, from the side, you're getting hit from all directions here. This is a massive storm. But even though you're in the midst of this massive storm, what does he say? Yet, it did not fall. That house that you built, it's going to stay standing. It did not fall because it had its foundation on the rock. So what is he saying? He's saying, if you live by my words, if you'll actually walk in the ways that I have given you, you can weather any storm in life. He's not saying you'll avoid the storms. Please don't hear that. Notice the storm hits this house, and it hits this house in a big way. I mean, it's a big storm. This is a hurricane-force storm, and it hits this house. So just because you have Jesus and just because you walk in his ways, do not think that you can avoid the storms of life. You can't. I mean, they just happen. You will have hiccups in your marriage, right? You will have career path, just chaos. You will lose a job, be looking for a job. You will have that jerk boss. You will have whatever, right? You'll have the storms of life. You will have health issues too, trust me. There'll be things that just happen. Johnny will break a leg. And you'll need that medical insurance. That's real life. The storms of life will hit. You will maybe hear that C word, right? Cancer. You may have a relative, somebody really close to you, die. You know, my life right now, for us, our family, the storm that we've been facing for the last few years has the name Alzheimer's on it. And we all face storms. That's not the question. The question is, how will your house fare in the storm? Have you done the necessary things to make sure that when the storms of life come, you can come through it unscathed? In fact, God can even use it for good in your life. You can come out better on the other side than you went into it, because that's what he promises. He promises even to use the bad stuff for good. But we got to be in his ways. We've got to be in his lifestyle. We got to be building our lives, right? The structure of our lives on the rock, which is Jesus. We just have to do it. That's the centrality. So I believe most of us, when we read this passage, think the storms of life, think the cancer, think the deaths, think the financial ruin. But let's just take a second and think something else for a minute. What do you think Jesus' disciples heard when they heard this for the first time? They don't have hurricanes there, right? What do you think when he said the storm and he described the water from above, the water from below, and the wind blowing and beating against the house? What do you think popped into their heads? Because they didn't have this passage. When we talk about storms, we're New Testament folk, and we think, oh, gee, it's the house on the sand or the house on the rock. They didn't have that yet. They're hearing it for the first time. So what are they thinking about? They're Old Testament people. Well, they didn't call it the Old Testament. It wasn't old yet, right? It was for them. It was the deal, right? Still. So they had the Old Testament. What are they thinking about when Jesus talks about a massive storm like that? They're thinking Noah. Are they not? They're thinking Noah and a storm, where God describes it for us, where it comes from above and it gurgles from below, and there's this massive storm. So I believe when they're hearing this, they're thinking Noah. Now, what's going on with Noah? That storm's about judgment, is it not? Now, I don't believe cancer is a judgment, so please don't hear me wrong. I'm not saying Alzheimer's is a judgment or that problem at work is a judgment. I'm not saying that. But in their mind, because of the Old Testament, storms were about judgment. Because that's what Noah's storm was about, was it not? Let me just show you. Noah personifies what Jesus is talking about. Notice what it says about you. You got to go to Genesis chapter 6 if you want to read the start of that story about Noah. But notice this. This is the account of Noah and his family. Notice what it says about him. Did he build his house on the rock? Noah was a righteous man. He lived in God's ways. He was right with God, right? Noah was a righteous man, and notice this even, blameless among the people of his time. So we could say that he lives in God's ways, right? He's righteous. He's blameless. So he lives in God's ways. He has built his house on the rock, metaphorically here. He walked faithfully with God. And notice what it says next. Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And now the earth was what? Corrupt. This is about judgment. It was corrupt in God's sight and was full of violence, and God saw how corrupt the earth had become, for all the people on the earth had corrupted their ways. And so what does God decide to do? To start afresh, to wash it all away, right? For them on that mountainside, hearing Jesus talk about this for the first time, what are they thinking about? I guarantee you they're thinking Noah. And it's not just that. Let me prove it to you even more. Every prophet in the Old Testament, when they talk about judgment, how do they talk about it? As a storm. Let me show you. Bear with me. Jeremiah 23, notice what it says. See the storm, you see it? See the storm of the Lord will burst out in wrath, a whirlwind swirling down on the heads of the wicked. The anger of the Lord will not turn back until he's fully accomplished the purposes of his heart. In days to come, you will understand it clearly. So they went to their Sunday school, if we can call it. It was more like Saturday school. But they went, and as kids, they went through their bar mitzvah, and they were trained in the ways of the Lord. And so when they thought storm, not only did they think Noah, but all of the prophets said, hey, there's a storm coming. There's a storm coming. There's a storm coming. Let me show you another one. Jeremiah. It says, this is what the Lord Almighty says. Look, disaster is spreading from nation to nation. A mighty storm is rising from the ends of the earth. And at that time, those slain by the Lord will be everywhere, from one end of the earth to the other. He's talking about the final judgment, and it's this storm picture. And it's not just in Jeremiah. Notice this one in Isaiah. It says, so this is what the sovereign Lord says. And this should sound really familiar. This is where Jesus, I think, is drawing in his sermon. See, I lay a stone in Zion. Zion is metaphorical for Israel. It's the mountain that the temple's built on, but it represents Israel, right? The people of God. You see, I lay a stone in Zion, a tested, firm, solid stone, a precious cornerstone. That's a foundation stone. That's the first piece of the foundation. The corner piece of the foundation. A cornerstone for a sure foundation. The one who relies on it will never be stricken with panic, right? He's talking about enduring a storm and laying this stone of Jesus and building your house on it. I will make justice the measuring line and righteousness the plumb line. It's all about living in his ways, right? And notice this. Notice the storm. Hail will sweep away your refuge, the lie, and water will overflow your hiding place. Your covenant with death will be annulled. Your agreement with the realm of the dead will not stand. And when the overwhelming scourge sweeps by, you will be beaten down by it. I'm telling you, when they heard Jesus talk about a storm, because of their time of studying God's word, every time the Bible talks about storm, it's about the final judgment of God. Here's another one, Ezekiel. We've got to get through all the major prophets because they all have it, right? Therefore, this is what the sovereign Lord says. In my wrath, I will unleash a violent wind. And in my anger, hailstones and torrents of rain will fall with destructive fury. You see it? So if you're Peter, James, or John, and you're sitting on the hillside, right? Because it's a Sermon on the Mount, right? They're on that hillside overlooking the Sea of Galilee, and they're taking in everything Jesus is saying about this new way of life. And Jesus is wrapping up, giving that invitation. He says, hey, listen, therefore, whoever takes these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the stone. They were thinking that Isaiah passage, that stone in Zion, that cornerstone, that foundation. And they were thinking storm. They were thinking the final storm. They were thinking judgment. We got to remember that. So hear me. I believe Jesus is talking about the storms of life. He's talking about the cancer and the Alzheimer's. He's talking about that struggle in your marriage. He is. But he's talking about more than that. He's talking about that storm each and every one of us must face. In fact, what has he just talked about verses before this? What was it about? Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter into the kingdom of heaven. And he says, on that day, what is he talking about? Judgment day. Many will say to me, Lord, Lord. But I'll tell them plainly to the face, I never knew you. Away from me, you evildoers. He's talking about judgment. The immediate context is judgment. So, This is all I'm asking you to think about. Jesus. Jesus is the solution for all the storms. Believe it or not, he's the guy that's going to get you through Alzheimer's. Yes. He's the guy that's going to get you through that struggle in your marriage. Absolutely. He is the guy that's going to get you through that financial crisis, that hard time. He will see you. He will make sure your house stands because you built your house on him, the sure foundation, Jesus. But he's also the guy that we stand before in judgment. And if we build our life in him, if we have him, what we've built will last. We will survive that judgment. And that's by far the biggest storm we face. By far. So Lynn and I have been doing this Alzheimer's thing now for a few years. And the hard thing about storms like that I, just based on my limited experience of these last few years, is it's an unending storm. It's an unrelenting storm. It beats and it beats and it beats, and it's there Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and it lasts for years, right? And it's going to last. For us, the storm is going to continue for more years, right? It's like Chinese water torture. It just never ends. It just hits you and hits you and hits you every day, over and over and over again. And as we have weathered that storm, this is the question I've asked. How do people survive without Jesus? How do they make it through? How can they? This is what I'm amazed by. This is what I'm amazed by. Is that with Jesus, having that relationship with Jesus, so we can pray, we can seek his face, we can do each day in his strength, right? We can face this thing every day with him. And guess what it's like? We have our hard days, right? Those days with tears, and it's harder than others. But mostly, get this, this is what's amazing to me. We feel blessed. Did you hear me? We feel blessed. In the midst of the storm, inside that house with Jesus, we feel cozy. We feel warm. We feel secure. We laugh. We have joy. We feel blessed. But if we didn't have Jesus in the midst of that, if we didn't have his strength and his joy, because joy is a fruit of the Spirit, it's not from us. If we didn't have hope, if we didn't have love, if we didn't have any of those things, guess what it would be like in there? The house would be falling. How do they survive is the question. And so Jesus goes there with the answer. This is what he says next, verse 26. He says, but, contrast, right? But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do anything with them, does not put them into practice, is like a fool. You see that? You see the word foolish there? Please see that. The word fool in Scripture is not a good word. And a fool is someone that lives like there is no God. Lives without any accountability to God. Lives like, God doesn't matter. Or that's just a bunch of myths and legends. That's just stories put out there by others to control you, right? Whatever. But you dismiss them. That's the definition of a fool. And so this is a person that's heard God's words and ignores them, whatever, and goes their way. They're like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. And notice it's the same storm in verse 27. The rains came down, it came from above. The streams rose, it came from below. And the winds blew and beat against the house, it came from the side. And guess what happened? And it fell with a great crash. When we were in that kid stage of life, we would go to the beach. We'd love going to the beach every year. One of the family traditions for us is we would build this sandcastle. And it would be a family project. We would spend the whole day on it, and we would go to town. In fact, we were so serious that we would bring man-sized shovels with us. Not those little plastic things, right? We brought garden shovels with us, the kind with the long handle, the big scoop on it, because we were taking this very seriously. We had these big bins and molds, right, for doing walls and towers and everything. And we were absolutely sick for sandcastles. I mean, we were the deranged family on the church building this massive structure, and it would take us all day. It was just something we did. Now, this is something I can tell you about every sandcastle we ever built. It was gone the next day. Right? Why? Because eventually high tide comes in. And those waves and the water starts rolling in and it beats against the walls, right? It beats against the sand. And the sand can't stand. You ever play with silly sand? Once you get water and sand mixed, you get this slurry. You can make all sorts of cool things with it because it flows. And man, that sandcastle, it'll be like it was never there. All right, there was no signs of that sandcastle the next day because sand flows. And what he's saying here is there are those people that are lazy that just build their house. They don't think about where they're building it. They put it on this flowing stuff that when it gets wet, it's just going to wash out underneath your house. And some people go to extra effort and are intentional and think long term and say, I'm not doing that. I'm digging down. I'm removing this dirt. I'm digging down till I find rock, or I'm laying rock. I'm playing a cornerstone out of Zion whose name is Jesus, and I'm building me a foundation for what I want in life. I'm going to build my life on his word, on what he's told me to. I'm going to live in his ways, and I'm going to build my house, my whole life on this truth. And what is he saying when you don't? If you don't build your house on Jesus, and we're going to see in a minute, there's only two options here, right? Rock or sand. There's only one foundation, and he's Jesus. And if we don't build our lives on Jesus, we are building our house on sand. And so what happens when disaster hits? That's the question. How do people get through? They don't. They don't have anything. What does it say? And it fell with a great crash. Do you feel the loss in that? The sadness, the shame, the frustration, all of that I built, and it just came crashing down in a moment because I didn't have Jesus. This is what happened to a friend of mine. His dad died. He was living his life apart from God. Without God, he was building his house on the sand, and this storm came called death. And it got him thinking about the real issues of life. Death can do that, right? Death is so final, so real, so foreboding for all of us. It looms in the background of all of our lives if we really start thinking about it. That's why we ignore it as much as we can. It is this devastating truth, this harsh reality of life. And his dad died, and he could no longer ignore it. And everything started crumbling around him. All of his thinking, all of his way of seeing life, it all just started crumbling. And he realized the answers he had no longer were real answers. He realized that they were the frauds that they really are, that they were just sand. They would just slide through his hand. There was nothing solid there. There was no truth. And so his life was absolutely devastated. And he just lived in this kind of fog and grief for months. And finally, somebody told him about Jesus. And he realized he needed some real truth, something solid. And so he accepted Jesus, and his life changed. He started building over again. He had to rebuild, right? Because the other house was gone. You have to start over, in a sense, build over on Jesus. But he's so thankful he did. He's actually thankful for that storm. Not thankful that his father died, don't hear me wrong. But this is, I think, some of the purpose that God has in these storms. I think this is why sometimes we face that trial in our marriage and why we face things like Alzheimer's. Is God's trying to, in his grace and in his kindness, to say, what you're building doesn't work. It's not going to last. It can't survive. You don't have anything solid in your life. And let me show you this little storm. Let me let you experience this little storm for a bit, because there's a bigger storm coming at the end of your life, and you need to be ready. And I want you to be ready. I don't want you getting to the end and realizing, oh man, I totally blew it. And so he gives us these little storms of life for us to check what we've built. And really do that soul-searching thing to see, do I really have something solid here? Do I really have something that'll last? Because the inevitable result is there will be a storm. And these people without Jesus, those marriages don't fare well. That crisis, that financial crisis, it's devastating. And they have nothing real to cling to. They have no truths or hope to hold on to. And it devastates their lives, and it falls with a great crash. A great crash. So this is what Jesus is saying, I think. Anything but living in his ways is a disaster. It's just waiting to happen. You haven't had the storm yet, so it hasn't been revealed yet. But if you build your life on anything other than Jesus, it's sand. And it's going to fail you in the end. Whether you realize it here because of a smaller storm, or you realize it because of the big storm at the end of your life, one way or another, you're going to have a great crash. And you're going to lose it all. You're going to lose it all. This is why I think we have to be really intentional about how we build. I think Jesus wants us to do more with this sermon than just listen to it. Isn't that obvious, right? He wants us to actually do something with these words. He wants us to think differently because we've heard it. He wants us to make different decisions in life because we have his thinking now. He wants us to actually live like the sermon is true. He wants us to internalize it, but more than that, he wants us to make every decision based on it. He wants us to do our finances based on his truth. He wants us to do our parenting based on his truth. He wants us to do our marriage based on his truth. He wants us to do our whole career. He wants us to do it all rooted on the rock of his truth. But to do that, what do we have to do with it? We got to internalize it. We got to really meditate. What is God's word teaching me right now? And how do I apply it? What does that look like? This is my concern. There are a lot of us that are doing this religion thing, this spiritual journey thing as an afterthought. And I don't mean to insult you, but to me it's a leftover mentality. So I'm just going to call your faith a Tupperware faith for a second, because that's what we put leftovers in our house is Tupperware. And basically what we do is we give God scraps. We give him pieces. We give him what's left over. If I have time, if I can fit it in, I'll be at church on Sunday. If we don't have anything else going on, if there's not a game or something else, we'll be at church. But God gets leftovers. And yes, if I can get to small group this week, I'll think about it. But I really don't have time to study the Bible with people and really get into it with anybody because I got all this other stuff to do. And it's only if I get all this other stuff to do, I'll give him some of my leftover time. Only if it's convenient. So we treat this whole spiritual thing as something we do when it's convenient. But the picture that Jesus paints is very, very radically different. He's saying there's a storm coming. Get serious about how you build. And you use hurricane straps and do this stuff. Get really serious. Jesus paints this picture of intentionality and seriousness. That this is important. Build. Take time and build. Take time to rethink. And so Romans 12:2, I've mentioned this passage numerous times because I think it points to this reality that we all need to face that, hey, if I'm ever going to be like Jesus, if I'm ever going to have this house that's built on the rock, it's actually going to begin here. It's going to be in how I think and how I respond and how I make decisions. And so I got to take this message and I got to process it. Think about it and meditate on it and internalize it. Do not conform to the pattern of this world. Instead, right? But be transformed by the renewing of your mind. With what? Jesus' truth, the power of God's word. And then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. we take in a lot of information every day. And now with media, the streaming capabilities of Netflix and then all this other stuff, whether social media, Instagram and TikTok, we got all of this stuff and we're inundated with it. Jesus would tell us, hey, I'm not supposed to conform to that stuff. I'm supposed to conform to God's word. I'm supposed to be transformed. My mind's supposed to be being rewired. That takes intentionality. That means, so I'm not one of these guys that say you can't go watch that movie. Well, depending on what movie it is, right? But most movies I'm okay with, right? So it's like I can go watch Shang-Chi, right? I can go to the movie theaters and I can enjoy a Marvel movie and just have fun with my family. I believe I could do that with my kids, my older kids, right? Now my kids are 35, but you get the point. But anyway, I believe you can go to that movie. But I believe also that movie then needs to be processed. It needs to be debriefed. I'm not gonna allow my kids or me to absorb that and act like that's reality. I'll say, hey, wasn't that fun? Wasn't that a good time? Didn't you love I won't tell you anymore because I've seen it. But isn't it really cool when that happened and that happened and that happened? And then we'd say, but you realize that reincarnation's not real, right? And you realize that karma, that doesn't really happen because there's a thing called God's grace where you avoid judgment. And you can analyze it, you can debrief because why? Because we're supposed to be constantly about being transformed. How? And how we think. We're supposed to be, Paul says, we're supposed to be taking every thought captive to make it obedient to Christ. That's how we build, folks. This is how we build. And so when the storm hits, guess what? We have built a way of thinking and a way of doing life. We naturally, when that storm hits and that crisis comes in our marriage, what do you naturally do? Your reflex is to go to Jesus and start praying and lean on him and pray for his strength. And then, okay, I need some counseling. Well, where do I get my counseling from? Man, I got to get it from the Bible. Right? It's this natural reflex because, hey, I've been transformed by this renewing of my mind and I've built my house on this rock and that house operates, the basic operating function for that house is the words of Jesus Christ. It's a totally different way. So it's not a half-hearted thing, right? It's not, hey, I'll give God leftovers. That's doom. You got to be intentional about this and process. That's why it's important. Our worldview is so important. And there's so many worldviews out there that are competing right now. And there's only one that's biblical. There's only one that's right. Can I say that? Yes, I just said it. I know it's politically incorrect to say that, but it's the truth. That's what Jesus is saying. There's only one rock. There's only one rock. The rest of it's sand. That's why where our kids are being taught is so important. Are they getting a biblical Christian view? And do you have the time when they come home from public school to debrief everything they've been taught and say, oh, no, not that one. You know that's not true, right? We don't believe that. This is what Jesus says. That's why I highly recommend a Christian education, that your child is hearing math, science, history from a Christian worldview. Why? They're already in school. Their minds are being what? Transformed. They are being transformed because their minds are being taught the way things really are, rather than somebody else's worldview and another worldview here and another worldview here. Let's just talk about the current debate right now. There's only one truth that's truth. There's only one that's solid. So let's talk CRT, critical race theory, for a second. Yes, we can talk about that in church, but just let me give you an example why this is so important. Critical race theory basically says today that white people are privileged, and they're privileged from 6 months on by some of the literature, really young, to be just selfish and to keep people down and to leverage their privilege at the expense of others. That's what CRT teaches, that white people are basically bad, right? And we need to put things back right. That is so far from Christian worldview. What is the Christian worldview? The Christian worldview is we all have a problem, not just the white people. Every race has a problem. We're all selfish, we're all proud, and we all need accountability. In every form, right? Everybody needs accountability because we all struggle with sin. We're all tempted to be selfish. And we will all abuse power when we have it. And we all use it to our advantage and our family's advantage when we do get it. We all will. And so what do? We create a government with balances, all this accountabilities. You do audits, you do this, you have news investigations. You do this stuff. Why? Because inherently humanity has a problem. We all do. And which do you want your kids to hear? Which do you want? And that's just one example. We got to be transformed by renewing our minds. And we got to keep that in mind for our kids, that they need to think biblically. Or why? What will happen when the storm of life comes for them? There will be a great crash, right? It can't stand. Don't set your kids up for failure. Don't set your kids up for loss. Don't set yourself up for loss. This is the way Paul puts it. So 1 Corinthians chapter 3, Paul describes this in incredible detail. In this case, though, when God's judgment comes, it's not a storm here, it's a fire. But it's still the same idea. Notice what he says. He says, by the grace God has given to me, I laid a foundation. Sound familiar? I laid a foundation. He's saying basically in your life, I came to you and I taught you about Jesus. I laid a foundation in your life called Jesus. So I laid a foundation as a wise builder, and now someone else is building on it because I'm no longer in your midst and you have a different pastor and somebody else is teaching you, but you're being trained up in the things of the Lord on that foundation of Jesus Christ. He says, but each one should what? Should build with care, and that's what I've been trying to stress. This is intentional stuff. We need to be careful about how we build. This is really important. I need to make sure my life is built on the rock, and I need to make sure my family's life is built on the rock. And this doesn't happen by accident, right? It happens with intentionality, taking God's word, internalizing it, and living by it. For no one, notice what he says, for no one can lay any foundation other than the one already laid, which is Jesus Christ. Is there any other foundation than Jesus Christ? The Bible says no. All the rest are sand. There's only one foundation. No one can lay any other foundation other than Jesus Christ. He's the only one that's rock. So if anyone builds on this foundation, and these are materials you can use to build, right? Your house, your life. Build out your life. You can build out using gold, silver, and costly stones. That's one set of options. Or you can build with wood, hay, or straw. Now, not many of us would intentionally think we're building with hay or straw, but obviously he's trying to point something out that people do, and they don't realize it. But regardless what you use to build with, it says their work will be shown for what it is, because the day, that's Judgment Day, that's the storm Jesus is talking about in our story, but this is now also the storm now pictured in fire, because that day will bring it to light. And then he goes on, it will be revealed with fire, and the fire will test the quality of each person's work. How you build, what you build with. If what has been built survives, what survives fire? Well, the gold wood and the silver and the costly stone will, but the wood and the hay and the straw won't. If what has been built survives, the builder will receive a reward. That's good news, right? We so want to hear Jesus say, well done. You did something with your life. You built it on my word, and you had the blessing of that because you were able to weather the storms of life because I was there with you. But you also have the blessing now because you get to carry this into the kingdom. You get to carry this in heaven with you. You have something. You have this reward that you've built. But the other option, but if it's burned up because it was hay, straw, or stubble, or wood, if it is burned up, the builder will suffer loss. And I want you to see that phrase, suffer loss. Because I don't think this will be good times in front of Jesus. I think you'll feel the regret, you will feel the shame, you will feel, oh, why did I not do this different? Why Why did I give God leftovers? Why did I build with straw? That was so stupid. What was I thinking? And you suffer loss, but yet will be saved. You see that part? That's important. Because you can't really lose your, if you're genuinely saved, you don't lose your salvation. You just lose what you've built. You lose your reward, but you don't lose heaven. You will be saved, yet will be saved, even though only as one escaping through the flames. Meaning, you smell like smoke, right? And your t-shirt's all singed, and you come through this, and you get through it. You get through judgment by the skin of your teeth because of what Jesus has done for you, but you've done nothing with your life. You didn't build anything. And how do you build? Jesus tells us. On the rock. On the word. By every word that comes out of Jesus' mouth, we build on it. And we assimilate it. And we bring it into our lives. And we meditate on it. And that's how we make decisions then. And that's how we do life. We put it into practice. And then we're like wise people who built our house on the rock. And so the rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against the house, and it stood. It stands. That's what we want. We want to stand before God with a house that survives. Because we did wise here, rather than foolish here. This is not something you dabble in, is my point. This is not something we take lightly. You're building for eternity here. And what you're building, you want to survive. And so this just takes seriousness. But hear me. You will be thankful you did. Right? You will be thankful you did because you've done that, you can weather the storms here, but you can also weather the storm there. That's what we're after. That's what we want for ourselves. It's what we want for our kids. Let's build. Let's build. Let's study God's word. Let's internalize it. Let's be in small group. Let's actually talk about the sermon. Let's do something with this and really make it a lifestyle and incorporate it and build, right? Using gold and silver and costly stones. Give him the most precious hours of the day. That's what those are. Gold, silver, and precious stones. Give him the most precious part of the day. The most precious part of your life. Not the hay or the straw or the stubble. The leftover parts. And really build. And you will not be sorry. Let's pray. Lord, I do praise you this morning. I praise you this morning for this sermon. I thank you for what it is, this manifesto, this way of life, Lord, that it's just transforming. It's just reshaping. It is so radically different. And thank you for giving us a rock. Thank you for giving us a sure foundation. Thank you for giving us something other than sand. Something that can endure and take the test of time and endure the storms of life. Lord, thank you for that. Lord, we praise you for that. Thank you for that cornerstone out of Zion. Thank you for Jesus. And thank you for your words, where you came down and took the time to reveal reality, reveal truth, reveal something solid that we could build on and build with. Lord, help us to see how important this is and build. Help us to run our race so as to get the prize. Help us to put our bodies in training and just, as Paul says, I buffet my body. All to train, all to be ready to run that race. Lord, help that truth to just captivate us and capture us. And Lord, help us to build. Help us to build like we've never built before. Help us to prepare. Help us to put the hurricane straps in and build that foundation firm and just do all of those things, Lord, now. And Lord, forgive us for the times we haven't taken it seriously. And Lord, I pray that you'll restore what the locusts have eaten in a sense. And you would help us to get serious about this and just go all out and help us to catch up. Help us to build solid and firm. Help us to build something for eternity, something that will last, something that's just rock solid. And something when the fire hits and the storm comes, Lord, it just stands. And we can stand before you and hear you say, well done. Help us in that, Lord. Bless us in that. I ask this in Jesus' name.